eQuills, building and nurturing a community of learning, collaboration, and shared abundance. Welcome to the very first episode of the eQuills podcast. Digital marketer and media entrepreneur Tyrone Fisher joined us on the eQuills space, sharing his best marketing tactic when working on a budget, which is to just not stop. Stick around as he explores how this and search engine optimization helped his online projects rank organically on search engines like Google, and how you can do the same.
Pleasure. Thanks so much. Hi everyone. My name is Tyrone Fisher. I'm going to be talking to you just kind of about the idea of not stopping when you're doing a kind of creative project. I'm just going to share my screen quickly, and I'll also get into a proper introduction of myself while I'm kind of going through it. So I'm going to be talking literally about the idea of just don't stop. It's not intentionally in reference to Nike at all, but I saw the kind of like similarities now. But basically the main idea that I'm going to be working on is when you're working on a budget, the best marketing tactic is to just not stop. It came up with this with the idea of if people are doing like a side project or just trying to run something that they don't have that much budget to do, or for creatives that are wanting to get their like writing out there, or video creators, podcasters and all of that, they want to get their content out there and grow that. And also for like kind of small to kind of micro-sized businesses that like need to market themselves, but they don't have budget to run massive marketing campaigns. And that is the best strategy, in my opinion, is to just not stop. And I'll get into that more as I go through this. So this is kind of what I'm going to be talking about. I'm just going to do a short introduction to myself, just to give you context into my realm of knowledge. Then I'm going to get into how I started my own it's technically called a user-generated content platform. I'll get into what that means and how I started that and my journey to starting that. And then I want to look at what all my failed projects have in common. And then I'm going to discuss kind of a thing that we do in the industry I'm in, which is search engine optimization. And it's kind of like a minimum 3-month rule. I'll get into that and explain that, and then look at how growth online works, and then kind of bring it back to the whole conclusion. And this is the 3 words I want to kind of just get home is just don't stop. So let me just introduce myself before I get into everything. Obviously, Tyrone Fisher. I studied English and philosophy at Stellenbosch, and then I got my honors degree at Stellenbosch. And I worked as a full-time community radio presenter in 2017. Then I started working in digital marketing in 2018 as a SEO specialist. The platform that I started, Over Saturated, I started in 2019. And I'm also a co-host on a podcast called Not Really Radio. And I'm currently working as not necessarily just an SEO specialist, but a digital marketer as a whole, and while also running kind of my side hustles. This is like all relevant because all of this experience has led me to this kind of way of thinking of why one should just not stop. And this experience of doing all of that and wanting to constantly create content. There's a constant theme throughout like what I try and pursue when I'm working, and that's wanting to create and make something and tell stories. And so I'm constantly in the pursuit of finding like, how can I earn a living while doing that and grow an audience so that I can really do that and do what I love. And that's to really ultimately tell stories. So that's that context. And working in digital marketing is all about helping me market my stories. Just a bit of background around when I started Over Saturated. So I first formulated the full idea of Over Saturated at the end of 2017 and beginning of 2018. It piggybacked off of a project that I started in 2015 called Sports Saturated. That was like a sports satire website that it kind of failed. Then I wanted to start Over Saturated with like a section called Saturated Sundays, which was focused on music interviews. I started that beginning of 2018, and that also failed a bit. But then in January of 2019, I was like, you know what? I'm going to do this thing. I don't care how, I'm making it happen. And I had literally I had $0 budget at the beginning. Nothing, no funding, obviously nothing. So I was like, okay, how can I do this for free? And I had a colleague that was like, cool, I'll set up your domain and I can host it for you for free because we work together like a professional courtesy. I was like, amazing, thank you. And then, yeah, I ran it like that for about a year. And then, yeah, it's ended up being like, okay, I need to transition this to a more professional hosting. And then I did. And I literally now spend 100 Rand a month on the platform. And that's kind of my budget because that's what I can afford. Because, yeah, it's not at a point where it's bringing anything back. But yeah, something that I noticed during this period of having, like, I've tried a few other projects, tried to start podcasts, and yeah, what they all have in common is that I stopped. So every project that I've done that you could kind of consider as a failed project, they didn't necessarily bomb out or anything like that. I stopped doing them. So Sports Saturated, rather, for example, I stopped it because I thought I didn't have time and I wanted to focus on my studies and working in campus radio. But in truth, that project, if I'd kept running it, could have really succeeded. It had been selected for a pitching. Yeah, it was one of the finalists in a pitching platform contest that I entered, and it got a lot of positive feedback. And knowing what I know now about SEO and how growth online works and how things take time, had I just kept at it, if I still had that website live today and I was running it, my interests have changed, so I'm not too bothered that it's not like up, but it probably would be a successful website right now, but I stopped. And that's something that I've noticed with everything that I would look back at and be like, well, that's technically a failed project. What they all have in common is that I stopped. So yeah, that's something that I like to take into consideration. And I started doing SEO like full time in 2018. And it's like, while I was doing it, something that I learned is that it takes time. So just a bit of context into SEO. I know a lot of you have like a lot more experience than me, so you may very well know all about it. But if you don't, search engine optimization is literally, it's about optimizing a website in such a way that it ranks well on Google. Essentially, how I explain it is my job is to get your website onto the first page of Google. That's the job in a nutshell. And there's a whole bunch of different things to it, but that's the main focus. And the thing with SEO is it takes time. You can't really rush it because when you optimize a website, Google will look at your website, also other search engines like DuckDuckGo, Bing, and all of that, will look at your website, crawl your website, try to understand it. And then when people search for your website, they'll try to see if your website is relevant to that search term or like phrase that someone puts into Google. And that takes time for it to understand, especially if it's a small website. Big websites, it's a bit different, but if you're a small website, it takes a long time. So that's like one of the biggest struggles we have with clients. People will start a website, they'll publish it, say, today, and they'll be like, cool, do the SEO in Feb, I want to be ranking by March. And we're just like, that's not how it works. It's not going to happen. So we often have to just reiterate to clients, it takes a long time. And as a general rule, we kind of say we can do the SEO in Feb. Like, say someone said, our site's just got live, please do the SEO work in Feb, have all that work done by the end of Feb. Let's say I got it done by the end of Feb. The impact of that work would only be seen 3 months later. So that would be, if my math is wrong, excuse me, like around June, like May or June, you would only start to see the difference. So I usually say, like we often say, there's a minimum of 3 months. Like you won't see a difference in before 3 months. And that's only see a difference. You won't really fully know if your SEO has worked up until 6 to 12 months after having done the work. It's a weird job role because there's very few things that are like, I can do this for you now, and you'll only know if the money you paid me was worth it 6 months from now. So if I was a video producer, right, and someone paid me for a video, they'll see the video and they'll watch it and they'll be like, this is great, this is worth money, here, I'm going to pay you for it. But with SEO, a lot of the time people have no idea what I'm doing in the background. And then they're like, okay, so I'm paying for this thing that I don't know if it's going to produce results or not, and I'm only going to know in 6 to 12 months. Why that's relevant is because it does take time, and if you do the right stuff, it does work. So just because you don't get immediate results, you can't get discouraged. You have to constantly follow whether your work is kind of being effective, and you can only start seeing that from 3 months onwards. So when you do SEO work, you're kind of like, okay, I've done this change. You check 3 months in, you're like, cool, things are looking a bit better. Then you got to check it, like constantly check it throughout the year after that to see how it's working. And I'll get into how I've seen this play out in real time on my own platform. Yeah, so with that, I'm kind of gonna just look at how a few things, how growth online works and how I track how growth works. So you may very well know these tools as well. I use Google Analytics. I use it to track all traffic to my platform and also look at how that traffic behaves. I mean, it's one of my favorite tools because I get to see, are people on my website? Then another one of my favorite tools is a tool called Google Search Console. It's a key tool for SEO with a whole bunch of purposes, but just for here, the point of why I use it is to see how my platform is performing on Google specifically. So analytics, you can see traffic from wherever it comes from, be that social media, Bing, DuckDuckGo as mentioned, another website, or people coming directly to your website, whereas Search Console, you can only see the traffic from Google itself. And something that I noticed through that and you looking at these tools, and also like one of the content creators I really respect, he kind of uses an analogy of whenever you go viral, or if you have a very well performing blog post or piece of content, you will see your traffic goes way up and then it drops drastically. But once the drop has happened, there's now a new normal. It feels bad in the immediate because you're like, whoa, I was getting 200 users a day yesterday for the last week. Now all of a sudden I'm getting 15 users a day. But if you were getting no users and then you got that massive spike and then that dropped and now you're getting like 15 users a day, you've grown, right? And that overall trajectory rather is good, but it doesn't feel that way necessarily. And that is, again, something that can happen within SEO of you'll feel good about something that you've done now and then cool, it performs okay, but then you kind of forget about it and then nothing really happens. And then a year later, all of a sudden that thing is bringing in tons of traffic. I have an example that I saw today. I wrote an article 2 years ago about why I didn't drink any alcohol for 40 days. And I wrote an article about it in beginning of 2019. And then I released it just around the time of Lent, actually. So that's when a lot of people around the world are like, okay, I'm going to stop doing something for 40 days. I released it, cool. It did okay. It did pretty well. And then forgot about it. And then now I noticed today that I'd gotten 100 new people this week. And I haven't even thought about that article. And then I was like, whoa, that's a massive spike. And then I went to Medium and looked at my traffic and it went way up. And I was like, whoa, that's super interesting. And then I checked one of my SEO tools and I saw that page is ranking first on Google in the US for 40 days without alcohol, which I found hilarious because one, I wasn't trying to hit the US market. Two, I wrote it 2 years ago. Three, I forgot about it. And four, a lot of people are searching 40 days without alcohol, which is very interesting. I was like, oh, it must be a lot of people are thinking of doing that for Lent or something. I don't know. But that was interesting. So that's just a part of kind of how like writing essentially, for lack of a better term, viral piece of content works. But that growth can also be very gradual, which I'm going to look at now. I'm going to look at it through kind of three ways. One, I'm going to look at my overall traffic to oversaturated over the lifespan of the platform. And then I'm going to look at an article I wrote about my experience of initiation in an all-boys school in South Africa. And then another article that I wrote on 5 ways to make money online as a South African. So I'm just going to look at kind of how that traffic worked with the context of what I've just told you. So here's Oversaturated's overall growth. I launched the platform in June of 2019. I spent 6 months faffing, for lack of a better term, being like, let me try design this thing. I owned the domain, but nothing happened. And then about June in 2019, I was like, I'm doing this, let's do it. And then that's where it went live. And then I released an article explaining what it was. Small little, I'm hoping you can see there's a small little spike over there. And then you can see it's just average little small amount of traffic, but I've got traffic after that spike. And then it drops massively, nothing. And then a spike again, and then it drops again. And then a massive spike, and then obviously goes down again, massive spike. But as you can see, after every spike, the traffic gradually gets bigger than it was before. And the more spikes, obviously, the better. The more spikes in traffic, the better, because more people on your website, the better, or platform. But so that's kind of how I've noticed whenever I release an article that did really well, afterwards, there's still a lot more traffic and it becomes a new normal. As you can see, just before 2020, I was getting very little traffic a day. And then, boom, kind of a viral article at the beginning of 2020. That was actually my experience of initiation article that we're going to look at now. But then after that, you can see constantly now I have a sustained amount of traffic every day. Each spike pretty much when a new article goes out, but then it continues that every day I'm pretty much getting traffic now, which is really encouraging. And yeah, you can see the massive difference between 2019 and 2020. And that's because by 2020, the website had been live for 6 months. So now Google started to get a better understanding of it. And also I had been pushing it on social media more. So people started to be like, okay, this is an actual thing. And that kind of just sustained, let me just keep doing this, has resulted in a lot more traffic. So yeah, we're going to first look at my experience of initiation and how it could easily result in the Parktown tragedy. On a creative note, I was inspired to write this not because I wanted to go viral or anything, but literally because I went to an all boys school and I have quite strong feelings about initiation because, yeah, I've seen a lot of potential harm there. And a boy had just drowned and I'm like, yeah, I was initiated. That could happen easily in any initiation. So I wanted to write like about that and just critique the idea. This was much more an academic, like, hey, I want to get this point across that we need to be critical of this and think and engaging with it. It ended up performing really well as well, which is never like not nice. But yeah, interestingly, I published it on January the 28th. And I want to point that out very specifically because we're going to look at the traffic and how that kind of worked. So on analytics, Google my traffic to that same blog post in analytics, you can see I published it in January of 2020, nothing until July, and then it gradually keeps going up. So this is a bit false because I am not a data analyst, so I didn't set up the tracking for this URL completely correctly. So social media sites automatically create another URL unless you like sort it out not to, which I don't have the knowledge to do right now. So in this period, it's just social media traffic that did happen, but it didn't go to this URL specifically, but it was going to that page. I hope that makes sense because the same problem will crop up later. But interestingly, most of this traffic on the right is from Google or other search engines. But it took 6 months for any of that traffic to be picked up. I released it in January 2020. 6 months later, the traffic picked up. So I kind of just like, let's say I had taken that blog post down in May because I was like, you know what, this traffic it's not performing. I take it down in May, then I miss out on all this potential traffic on the right, which would have been upsetting. And now to this day, that blog post still gets traffic. It got traffic today. I was checking my analytics earlier, and it gets traffic every day, which is super interesting. And then on Search Console, it does this. It has exactly the same story, right? And now this is just traffic from Google. So nothing for 6 months, absolutely nothing. And then boom, all of a sudden, it starts to get traffic in the middle of the year, which I think is just super fascinating how you can release something and put in all your heart, like all your effort, or at least online, and you give it your all, and then crickets for months before it starts to perform, which is very interesting with the idea of just don't stop because you don't know what's happening in the future. And I find that very interesting. And again, let's look at the next article, which is this article like I wrote on 5 ways to make money online as a South African. This was very much, hey, this is something people are searching for. This is something that I know can help people. I want this thing to get as big as possible, and I want it to rank on Google. This was like, whereas my experience of initiation was like, hey, I want people to hear this message. This was like, I want people to come and read this blog because I want to rank for SEO. This was a much more marketing type blog than the previous one. I wrote this on the 8th of May. Also, at the time, I had just been retrenched. So it was also like, this is how I'm going to make money online, and this is how you can make money online too. So I was trying to use this blog to try and help me make money online, ironically. But yeah, I wrote that in May of last year. And again, if we go to the traffic on Google, May to July, there is no traffic. Again, There was social media traffic. I think this did quite well on LinkedIn, but again, with the URL, it's a bit lost. But this is just Google traffic, essentially. You get nothing up until July. So that's, like a month and a half of just nothing. And then it spikes in August, which is 3 months, like August, September. It's 3 months since I published it, right? And then check, once it spikes there, then there is now a new normal essentially developing there. And then it got a huge amount of traffic in September and then drops off, but it's still way higher than before. And it overall means that my website is getting way more traffic than it was before. And it's the same story again on Search Console. As you can see here, that page now got from May, the 3rd of May, nothing. And then from June, it goes way up, and the average position, which is this orange line, which is basically the average ranking it has on Google, it keeps going up and up and up, which is super interesting. And it, again, like my experience of Initiation Blog, this gets traffic every day to today, which is very interesting. And I actually, interestingly, today I wrote a blog in December that I was very much like, this is for Google. I want this to rank. And I got no traffic in January, and I felt quite despondent. And then I checked today, and I got my first Google traffic, just unprovoked. I was like, that's amazing, which is literally two months later. So it really does, like with SEO, it really does show. It takes time, especially when you're starting a small website, because this, like, my platform doesn't have the same size or clout or anything that a Medium does, for example. So an article on Medium is going to perform way quicker. But when you've got something small on a low budget, stuff takes time, because it takes time for Google to crawl and to understand, because there's billions of websites out there. So going through all of those websites obviously takes the Google algorithm a long time to understand. But over time, it grows. And that's the thing of just keeping it growing. So that's literally what I want to say from what I've learned from this whole experience is, had I stopped with Oversaturated, had I taken these articles off within 3 to 6 months of writing them because maybe they weren't performing that well, I never would have experienced the traffic that I've gotten over the last few months. So I would have lost out on tons of potential traffic and an audience that does exist. They're just waiting to find what I've put out there. So I think when one is like on a budget, or if you're a creative and you're working in the professional environment, but you've got other stories you want to tell, it can be really easy to get discouraged when you see someone with a book deal, or how other people are growing, or you see someone that, like, at least as a student, someone graduated with you and you see them running their own business now, and you're like, whoa, okay, I didn't get that same trust fund as you. But like, it can be really disheartening. And also when you focus on what you could do with a big budget. I think that's something that I sometimes struggle with. Like, if someone just gave me this amount for this platform, this thing would be crazy. But you can, and then that can get you stuck in your head and you go down a whole process, when in actuality, what you should rather be doing is just working with what you have, just creating, building, and keep actively putting yourself out there. Like, don't be afraid to be like, okay, this is there. I want to create this. I'm going to put it out there and see. And I always say, like, an unpublished blog has 0% of it. It cannot get any people reading it, but a published blog has 100% increased chance of working, which is, it's a bit stupid, but it's true. If you don't put your work out there, no one's ever going to read your work. Or if you don't, no one's ever going to watch your work. So when you do constantly keep putting yourself out there, your platform does grow. If you stop, as I learned, it won't grow. So if you want to see your passion succeed, it's really simple. Just don't stop. I know that's a bit of like a motivational speaker thing, but like, I genuinely think a lot of creatives do need to hear that, of like, just keep creating and putting it out there and don't stop, and your passion will grow and it will succeed. That's all I have prepped.
We hope you're now confident to apply SEO to your online projects and feel empowered to never give up on them. Tune in next time for another episode on the eQuills podcast.